Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. The 5 versus 5 undercard of Bivol versus Beterbiev was announced yesterday. I did a video on it, and yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic. As I said in my video, I think it's a remarkable card. I see no reason to criticise it. I thought the presentation, the whole promotional launch of it was brilliant. I love the little supporting sort of Guy Ritchie style promo they did for it. I liked all the sort of shtick, all very sort of pantomime and, let's go to the fair, let's go to the fun fair type of vibe of, wearing the masks and taking them off and revealing who they were and all this sort of thing. I know that we had pretty much a rough idea what some of the fights would be. But nevertheless, I liked the hyperbole. I bought into it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And yeah, brilliant. What a brilliant fight. But it is possible to get caught up in hyperbole and think, okay, is this the greatest card ever? And all this sort of thing. No, it isn't. But it is up there. I mean, it's a brilliant night's boxing. I mean, I don't really see how anyone can say it isn't. But I thought, let's do a little compare and contrast, because if you're, of a certain age, like I am, you will remember a lot of the Don King cards from back in the, especially the sort of first half of the 90s. And some of them were absolutely stacked. Some of them were brilliant. So I thought, obviously I can't go through every single one, but I thought what I'd do is I would go through some of them, and we'll have a look and sort of compare and contrast with this Riyadh card. So I thought, well, who shall I start with? Well, why not start with one of the biggest names in the history of boxing? And I'm going to go through my lifetime, just the ones I'm not going to go way back, and but I'll do a few that I actually recall watching. And I thought, who better to start with than Mike Tyson? Let's have a look at some of his cards and see what, not just the Tyson fight, but what was on the undercard. So let's have a look at one that I actually saw on closed circuit TV in Leicester Square. Mike Tyson versus Frank Bruno, the first fight. And if you look at, it was won by Tyson, 5th round stoppage. If you look at the undercard, you had Azuma Nelson against Mario Martinez. Nelson, probably Africa's greatest fighter, or certainly one of the top 3. Mario Martinez was a very tough Mexican fighter. And that was a really good fight. It was a TKO in the 12th round. I remember, because when I say closed circuit telly, by the way, I'm talking about watching it in a cinema, for those who don't know. So you've got this colossal screen. It's like a gigantic television set, and I remember that fight. It was a good technical fight from Nelson, who was his usual brilliant self, pacing himself perfectly, stopped Martinez in the 12th round. I think Martinez was on his feet, but he was sort of stunned badly, and the referee stepped in. It's a good fight. Then you had Julian Jackson, who you may know about, the Hawk, he used to call himself. One of the hardest punchers of my lifetime. I mean, a pure puncher, but vulnerable, could be hit and hurt. Not much of a chin, but Christ almighty, he could whack. He stopped Francisco de Jesus in 8 rounds. Yeah, 8 rounds, not 5 rounds, 8 rounds. And it was not an impressive performance by Jackson. I remember people being rather bored watching it because it was frustrating. Francisco de Jesus wasn't considered any great shakes, but eventually he got the job done, Jackson did, in 8 rounds. Then you had Buster Douglas winning a 10-round unanimous decision over Trevor Berbick in what was a snoozer, an absolutely boring fight. And then you had an undefeated fighter called Rodolfo Moran, who went absolutely nowhere. I think Frank Bruno ended up knocking him out in a round. He had a fight, and that was about it. No more. So I don't think that card in any shape or form compares to the Riyadh card. Still on the subject of Mike Tyson, how about one of Tyson's biggest victories, if not his biggest victory, which was against Michael Spinks, 1-round knockout. What was on the undercard of that fight? Trevor Berbick lost a 12-round unanimous decision to Carl Williams. Wasn't a particularly entertaining, well, it wasn't an entertaining fight at all. Buster Douglas sprang what at the time, believe it or not, was considered a little bit of an upset. 7th round knockout over Mike Williams. Williams was this muscle-bound heavyweight. No great shakes, really. Being pumped up as one of the great prospects. Didn't really go anywhere. Douglas, technical, got the job done. Then you had Reggie Gross getting stopped in 2 rounds by Razor Ruddock. Gross actually would go on to, I think he's still in prison, serving several life sentences. He was a gang guy and ended up committing murders and all that. But he was an enforcer, I think, went around killing people. And yeah, he got done in 2 rounds by Razor Ruddock. He also got done in a round by Tyson. I think Frank Bruno beat him up as well over about 8 rounds. And you had Maurice Blocker, who was very, very good welterweight from the 90s. And he stopped Orlando Orozco in 5 rounds. And then he had a few other fights, but nondescript fights, nothing special at all. Just, no, that doesn't compare to the Riyadh card either, the Beterbiev Bivol card. Not for me, anyway. How about when Mike Tyson fought Evander Holyfield the first time, got knocked out in 11 rounds, or stopped, I should say. What about the undercard? Well, you had Henry Akinwande, who stopped Alexander Zolkin. It was stopped on a cut in the 10th round. Wasn't an entertaining fight. Not a bad matchup, actually, but wasn't an entertaining fight. Akinwande was never entertaining. Very long, thin, rangy guy. Zolkin was never any great shakes, but was okay. You then had Michael Moorer eventually stopping Franz Botha in 12 rounds. And I remember that fight because Botha was just so game, so tough. But Moorer sort of ground him down and eventually stopped him. And I think that was for a vacant title. I want to say the IBF, but I can't remember exactly. I think it was the IBF vacant title. And then you had Ricardo Lopez, who is a brilliant Mexican fighter, sometimes overlooked, who was a light flyweight, minimum weight, and light flyweight champ. Fantastic fighter, retired undefeated. He scored a win in 6 rounds against a guy who I can't recall the name of the guy, but a lot of those lighter weight guys, the minimum weights, those were the days before YouTube, before the internet. So if you wanted to watch the smaller guys, as I've said before in videos, you had to you had to buy old VHS tapes and watch them weeks after the event. And so it was difficult to keep track, to actually watch these lighter weight guys because they just never showed them. Also on the card, interestingly, was Scott Welch, the British fighter. He scored an 8-round unanimous decision. I can't remember the guy. And then Christy Martin, the women's pioneer, she was on the card and got an early knockout against Bethany Payne. But yeah, the card doesn't compare to the Bivol Beterbiev card at all. I don't think so anyway. And then I thought, okay, those are a few of Mike Tyson's cards. One of the biggest name in boxing, certainly in the 90s. One of the biggest names in boxing. One of the most lucrative names in boxing in the history of the sport. What about Muhammad Ali? Now, this is before my time. I mean, as I've said before, the first fight I can recall watching was the 3rd Ken Norton-Ali fight, although I didn't know what I was watching. I was too young. But prior to that, let's look at Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, because we're talking about, 2 of the greatest fights ever. The Fight, the first one, Madison Square Garden, and then you had the Thriller in Manila. So if you look at the Thriller in Manila, what was on the undercard? And the answer is virtually nothing. You had Larry Holmes stopping Rodney Bobic in 6 rounds. And Rolando Navarrete was a pretty decent fighter. He actually lost a decision to a journeyman. And that was it, virtually. That was it. So even though we remember the Thriller in Manila as one of the greatest heavyweights, if not the greatest heavyweight fight of all time, in terms of depth on the card, there was virtually nothing there. Virtually nothing there. All right, let's go back. Let's go to the first Ali Frazier fight, which, of course, at the time, colossal event. Like I say, it was in Madison Square Garden. Biggest fight in the history of boxing, as it was propelled to be. or publicised as. What was on the undercard? Amazingly, you had Rahman Ali, Muhammad Ali's brother, losing to Danny McAlinden. When I looked this up before I did this video, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, really? I never even knew that. But yeah, Danny McAlinden was on the undercard and beat Rahman Ali. And McAlinden, in case you don't know, was a English fighter who I think he had about 30 wins and a dozen losses in his career. And he fought, British level guys, and there he was. He can at least say I was on that card, amazing. But there was virtually nothing else on it. A bunch of fighters who, if I mention their names now, I mean, some of them I'd never heard of, but you wouldn't have heard of them. So again, in terms of depth of the card, no, in no shape or form is it comparable. In no shape or form. Then I thought, all right, Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. How about that's another of the biggest heavyweight. Certainly one of the biggest heavyweight upsets of all times. Took place in Zaire, of course, the former, the Democratic Republic of Congo, as it's called now. And we all know about we all know the story about it, Ali going over there, defeating the great monster that was George Foreman. The fight was postponed because Foreman got a cut, reminiscent of, Tyson Fury getting postponed against Usyk is reminiscent of that. A lot of people compared to. What was on the undercard? Nothing. No. Go and have a look. I mean, according to BoxRec, and again, this is before my time, there may have been fights on between completely nondescript fighters, but I could only find one fight against two guys I had no idea who they were. No idea at all. So that fight alone was it was a standalone fight virtually. So you can't even make a comparison with what's going on in Riyadh. And then I thought, all right, okay, what about some of Don King's other cards? Because they weren't all Mike Tyson cards. For those that don't know, that don't remember Don King, he would very often, if it wasn't a Mike Tyson card, very often he'd stack 4, 5, 6 even world title fights or leading contenders together, and a bonanza of boxing. It was some of his cards. I mean, whatever you think of King, and I think he's a psychopath and a complete scumbag, but in terms of entertainment for boxing fans, yeah. If you throw your morality aside, yeah, I mean, he was putting on incredible cards. And one that stuck in my mind was the first Gerald McClellan versus Julian Jackson card, because it was, I remember looking forward to the McClellan-Jackson fight and thinking, oh my God, this is going to be an explosion. This would be like, Subriel Mateus facing Isaac Cruz or something. Well, better than that. This took place in 1993, by the way, so we're talking 31 years ago. You had McClellan stopping Jackson in 5 rounds. On the undercard, you had Lennox Lewis outpointing Tony Tucker. You had Julio Cesar Chavez stopping Terence Ali, who was past his best, but pretty good fighter, Ali. That was in 6 rounds. You had Meldrick Taylor, who was coming back. I think he was coming back not just from the first Chavez defeat, but from he'd been knocked out by Terry Norris, I think. He was coming back against a journeyman. It was a runaround for Taylor. King was bringing him back. King signed him and was bringing him back with a view to matching him against Chavez in a rematch, which he eventually did, and Chavez won the rematch as well. Hector Camacho had a little runaround, stopped the guy in 5 rounds. Eric Podolak, I think the guy's name was. And then you had prospects on there, guys who would never quite make it but were good fighters. Like Ober Carr, who at the time was undefeated. He fought a complete journeyman who I'd never heard of. And there were a couple of others, I think. So that is a good card. That's a very, very good card. I haven't got time to go through absolutely every single Don King card, but you get the, yeah, trust me. If you go on BoxRec, look at some of those 90s Don King cards. They were very, very good and stacked, absolutely. So that's the closest comparison you can come to this Bivol Beterbiev card. I still think, even though I willfully admit I was suddenly a big fanboy watching that, unveiling of the 5 versus 5. I thought it was brilliant, really, real great fun. But I don't think I got carried away. I think it's one of the best cards I can recall in my lifetime, even compared to a lot of the Don King cards. And if you think differently, comment below. But give me examples of cards that I may have forgotten. Because, God, when you watch as much boxing as I have in your lifetime, I look back and I think it's amazing I had time to do anything else. But, yeah, comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, if you could. If you could hit the subscribe button, that would help us out. And also hit the like button. Give it a little poke. Much appreciated. And I'm looking forward to you giving me examples that I may have forgotten. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will catch you later. And, of course, bye for now.